Ladies and gentlemen, the next session will begin in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The next session will begin in 2 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The next session will begin in 2 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next session is about to begin. Please welcome your host, Sasha Vakulina.
Welcome back after a short break for this next session on GlobeSec 2022 agenda. And this session is called Burning the Breadbasket, Wider Impact of Russia's Aggression in Ukraine. During the next 45 minutes, we will be talking about different consequences, including the grave consequences, of course, when it comes to the agriculture sector and food crisis, but also the reasons and what can be done. Can we do more now? If not, can we do more later and at what stage? And it's my great honor and privilege to introduce my speakers here. Eduard Heger, Prime Minister of Slovakia.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you.
And Karl Nehammer, Austrian Chancellor.
Thank you.
My name is Sasha Vakulina. I'm moderating this session, and I will be looking forward to hearing your questions. We will have a Q&A, probably towards the end of this panel. If you're here in the room, please don't hesitate to raise your hand later and to ask your question. Also, do use Slido. This is the tool that you're all familiar now as you're in the GlobeSec, not for the first day, not for the first session. I do have a tablet with me here. I'm going to be getting all your comments, all your questions, and I'm going to make sure that I'm going to bring them to our speakers. We're going to try to structure the session in ideally in somehow 3 parts of the way we go. The first one, we're going to discuss, I'm going to ask you, where do we stand now? What is the situation now and your take on it? The second part would be the immediate reaction, going into short-term solutions and, of course, then the longer-term perspective of what can be and should be done. Now, it is the 100 days since the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, and the Russian aggression against Ukraine has brought the world in peril due to so many reasons and so many aspects of this war. And one of them being, of course, also the crisis in agriculture when it comes to the blocked ports, when it comes to Ukraine, and also the sanctions when it comes to Russia. Let's start with the first part. The question of where do we stand now. Prime Minister, let me start with you. What are the most urgent issues that you think are here on the agenda to solve as of now, as of 100 days since the war?
Well, we heard yesterday from the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, that first of all, they need the help with the weapons to protect themselves. But the very second important issue is the grain. that they have in Ukraine, and it is blocked, is stuck. That's what also Ursula von der Leyen was speaking about. And that we have to very quickly deliver to the other parts of the world, because otherwise we are facing a great famine. And to me, this is, we haven't thought of this at the beginning when Putin started the aggression. We saw the impact on Ukraine, then we started immediately to feel the impact on the European Union. But now we see how he's actually, I would say, terrorizing the people in other parts of the world who have nothing to do with this war, and actually putting them into the threat of a great famine, which could then cause a great migration wave, etc., great instability. So that's why we have to act very quickly. And its first priority is to help the Ukrainians secure the ports at the sea, so they could start to export it on the boats, on the vessels, because we know that even the trains, if we put in operation, will not be able in the same time to export the grain over the green route. So we have to do it. We have to do it as much as possible. But the priority number one is to help to free the ports, secure the guarantee, or guarantee the security of the Ukraine before the Russian invasion, and get it through. This is, of course, very challenging and difficult task to do, but is a priority number one after the weapons.
Yeah. What's your take on that? When it comes to Europe, this is also slightly different, because of course we have heard already when it comes to the food crisis and food security, we've heard the stark warnings by the UN about this food crisis that may last for years if this is not solved now and not tackled. But also we have heard from the beginning of April by the European Union saying that for the moment the EU is largely self-sufficient for food. But here it is, for the moment.
Well, first of all, you know, between our two countries are some differences. So we are a neutral state. We are a member of the European Union. We completely support the sanctions against the Russian Federation. And on the other hand, we are not allowed to deliver ammunition, for example, or weapons. Why I just mention is when we think about what we have to do or what we can do and what does it mean for Europe and North Africa, for example, or Pakistan or India, I think we have find now fast solutions. Yeah? So there is maybe one way to say the harbors have to be freed. On the other side, made a phone call journey, I would say. You know, I started with President Zelensky, after Prime Minister Smihal, and President Putin, with the President of the International Red Cross, Maura, and with the Secretary General of the United Nations, Guterres. And I think what we need now is to bring out the wheat from Ukraine. So, for example, we the UN General Secretary started now 2 missions to help to build up safe corridors to bring the corn out. And for example, President Putin guaranteed in the phone call that the Russian military will not attack any transport of corn. So, you know, we have the harbor of Odessa, for example, it is mined. And he told me now the Ukrainians have to clear the mines. And I told him, yeah, it's a good idea, but you have to guarantee that not the Russian armed forces attack the harbor of Odessa. He told me, well, he will guarantee that, but you know, that are only words. We don't know if it's true or not. So I think we need the United Nations now in this question, because maybe in the future there will be a possibility to free the harbors, but now we have to bring out the seeds, the wheat, the corn. And so we support Ukraine now in the landway you mentioned. It's really tricky because we need the harbors. And so I'm in a strong contact, for example, I'm with the Prime Minister Smihal. He's the operative one, I would say, in the government. And we have a lot of expertise in Austria how to handle such situation. We have huge Austrian companies like Raiffeisen, for example, who supports now the government of Ukraine to bring out the corn. Yeah? But we need the harbors, and this is, I think, the most important question, how we reach that goal.
This is, of course, the question about where we stand now and the immediate solutions. Say we find this solution now to bring the grains that are already stuck there through different corridors, different missions, different actors involved in sites. But Ukraine is indeed, burning the breadbasket. This grain will be somehow safely transferred, but in a month, we're going to have another conversation about the next one. How to deal with, what do you see as the, how can we secure somehow the instant solution now, but also the one that would work, okay, not in a long term, because infrastructure is a different conversation, of course, when it comes to rail deliveries. But let's say in a month, in 6 months, for the next grains, for the next harvest.
Well, I think it all goes all hand in hand with the security. And that's why I think it's very good, and I'm really proud and glad that this forum during these 2 days was dedicated to the discussion about the reconstruction. Because the reconstruction, just like you mentioned, is not only about the infrastructure. It's focused also on the renewal, on the continuation, on their production. And we cannot avoid the topic of the food, just like you raised. Because if we clear this issue short term, that we delivered the harvest of last year and early harvest of this year outside, then this task is accomplished, but we're facing this task next year. And that's why it's important to speak about it and look for solution. We know there is not going to be easy solutions, but we live in the times where nothing is easy these days, right? We got pretty used to this over the last 2 years. But what I appreciate about that there is so many countries involved, and we're looking for the same solution. So the first thing is, if we secure the ports, let's say Odessa and others, and we'll be able to find a solution where we will have Russians on one side, Ukrainians on the other side, and getting the exports out, that gives a good hope that we'll be able to secure also the territory inside, that the renewal could start and the planting of the new harvest is also ready, etc. Because this will be the task to have, since they are breadbasket. They are. And these are higher priorities than the national priorities. So I think we have to emphasize also to Vladimir Putin, he must understand that these are global priorities. And the pressure of the countries of this global issue must be there. We must be united and say, you are causing too much, so free out the way for securing the food for the rest of the world. And then, this is the second step, and then we can speak about, okay, let's rebuild the infrastructure in the Ukraine, because we don't want this country to die in front of our eyes, because it doesn't have enough resources, it cannot be self-running, etc. So that's why, if we are united, and I think the world pretty much is united on the fact that this aggression shouldn't be, and they should pull back. So that's what we need to help to secure the Ukraine, to stabilize and start to grow, and see what happens with the conflict that we have on the eastern part of the country.
Well, you said here about so many countries involved in looking for solutions. And I do have a question on this from Jan on Slido. Why do African governments remain neutral in the aggression against Ukraine when they suffer most from the food blockage? This is an excellent point, Jan. I'm going to just twist it a little bit, and I'm going to ask the same but slightly different. Would that help, and how would that help, if African countries also gotten on board with the wider solutions when it comes also to sanctions, and whatever they can be involved with in finding solutions to that, Chancellor?
It's really a very good question, because we have to accept that we have strongly opinion in the so-called Western world, but not in the rest of the world, and this rest of the world is huge. We talk about China, we talk about India, we talk about Africa. So what we have to do now is to find allies. And we have to convince them, and we have to protect them as well. We talked about corn, the export of corn from Ukraine, or wheat. We didn't talk about fertilizers. It's a very important question. When we were in the council in Brussels, we met there also in a video conference the president now of the African Union. And the president told us they need fertilizers. And otherwise, we have crisis now in Africa. Also, I think in 2 months, maybe. So I think the most important problem is that we don't have time. And you know, we heard about that, I think 60 million tons of corn are still inside Ukraine. And the world needs that. India, Pakistan, for example, Northern Africa, Egypt. And we destabilize this region if we cannot help and support them. So I think we have to do many things now parallel. We have to think about how we can support Africa with fertilizers. We have to think about how we can stabilize Egypt, for example, because the costs of food are now growing. And this is dangerous for the governments there. Think about the past. And suddenly, we don't have only the war in Ukraine. We have a destabilized situation all over the world. And I think this is now really dangerous.
But let me ask you this. You said in the first answer that when the war started, thinking of agriculture exports and food crisis was not specifically the first thought that Ukraine had and the partners had, Europeans had, right? But 100 days into, how to provide it, because if it comes to, again, when you said to convince other allies to be on board with the solutions, is also to be able to protect them. So we still go into security.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think we need to look at it from a wider perspective. And what it seems, it started all with pandemic, because till then everything looked good. There was economic growth. We were living in a
good
very
old
good
time. You
comfort.
That's what we were discussing here last year.
Only 2 years ago.
Comfort zone, and we thought that we're going to end up with pandemic and we're good. Well, not really. From crisis to crisis, that's what we can describe this the couple of years. And we thought we out of it, and what it looks like, there's going to be several crises, growing crises ahead of us. But we get a good training during the pandemic and during also this beginning stage of this war that prepares us and shows us main principles that we will have to apply in these even more turbulent times ahead. Because the turbulence was local. Now it's regional, and it's going to become now global. But the good thing that during the local and the regional turbulence, we got so united that we have to get more countries now from the global perspective on the same principle of cooperation and face it. And Africa is asking very truly the good question. They say, okay, well, from our perspective, your internal issues in Europe don't seem that, I wouldn't say serious, but it's like they don't feel it immediately, because the security of them is not by the war. But now we see the security is threatened because of the food and the fertilizers. So we see that we have to address it in a fair way, and we cannot say, okay, well, guys, you know, we have so much trouble here, we cannot help you. We cannot say that, because it will come back to us. But we'll have to attract also the other global partners and say, you must get on the board, because if you're not part of it, if India is not part of the solution, if the United States is not part of the solution, if the African countries are not part of the solutions, then we will not have the solution. So it's about building a bigger and bigger discussion table where we look together for the solution. And we see we are capable, we can be fast, so, and that's the process we have to achieve. So right now, we don't have to have all the answers, because we don't have the answers. If you ask, so what's the answer to it? Well, we don't know, but we know where to look for it, and that's very important. And who to look for it with, that's very important.
Yeah, and one would just wonder whether, you know, for some of the countries, anybody would understand, as you said. At first, it might seem distant because this is not in their region or their politics. But then we are talking about the completely world food crisis here and the consequences. And the sooner you understand it, the better it is. Because what is a bigger argument to convince countries and leaders to get on board with looking for solution, if not starving people, if not...
Especially because food crisis is a first stage of then security crisis, world security crisis. And we don't want that. So that's why we have to get them on board. And I think that will help why they will get on board.
But you know, we also have to mention when the war started against Ukraine, the solidarity in Europe was really strong. And I think in the first time we really showed unity against the Russian aggression. But the world watched us in this moment. And African states say, interesting, if something happens in Europe, you live solidarity, you stay strong. We had so many crises in Africa the years before. Where have you been? What does a life count in comparison in Africa to Europe? And I think we have to think about that. The reason why they don't support this, because they say, now you are coming, now you want us to support the sanctions against the Russian Federation. But we need also the Russian corn, so why shall we do that? We need the Russian fertilizers, so why shall we do that? And I think we have to find answers. So it's, for example, very important, like the Chancellor of Germany did, to visit South Africa, for example, to talk to the President of the African Union. I think we have to show our interest to their continent in a way so that they can believe us. And now the conflict showed that we have to invest more in these areas.
If I may to add, again, the parallel. When we had the pandemic, right after the European Union, we came up with the RRF, Recovery and Resilience Funds and Plan. And it was based on investments together with reforms. So that's where we saw, okay, we need to reform our countries. Now we're speaking in the EU that we will have to reform the European Union in a certain way. Now we say to the countries around us, if they want to join us, they will have to reform themselves. But we see with these global challenges that there will have to be reforms of the global organizations and approach. Because what Karl just said, the countries from other continents are asking, why you weren't behaving like this when we were in trouble? And that's a very fair question, because if we are those who honor democracy and honor the values of freedom, rule of law, etc., justice, just and fair treatment, then they ask, so how can you be faithful to a fair treatment and not acting fair to everybody? And that's the reform I'm speaking about. So we are going to really challenge big questions that we were kind of pushing in the comfort zone. In good times we were pushing away because there was no need. But this need is going to push us to build a better world. And we can decide either to build a better world, or the world will become much more wild and chaotic, and we cannot allow that. Especially, it's the duty on the developed countries, of the economic and also with democracy developed countries. It's our duty to really help with these reforms and build a better world.
Well, this is why, as we discussed in the beginning, setting the stage for this discussion is that the crisis caused by the war in Ukraine has far-reaching consequences in all the aspects, all the spheres, and there are actually no borders in this sense of the war in Ukraine. It does not stop at the border of the countries around Ukraine, of the countries that showed solidarity from the very early days and accepted so many Ukrainians and gave help done like sanctions and the measures and so on. But of course, when it comes to the other countries who are fairly asking the question why now the approach is different, this is an issue that will also be discussed, has to be discussed on a bigger stage. Also, one of the huge aspects there, and this is the discussion that has been happening over the past couple of weeks when it comes to migration as well. These are the aspects. So that's what I mean. It's much bigger picture. We have a question which I wanted. Henry Kraft asks a question, and I'm gonna just say before that, in the early days of Russian invasion, when it comes to weaponizing things, that was Russia's energy. We talked about weaponizing energy as a leverage by Russia. Now the question by Henrik, is Putin weaponizing food? Syria, Lebanon, Egypt are most dependent on grain from Ukraine and Russia. Could the food shortage lead to a new wave of refugees? But I think we all agree, yes, it could, but we're going to touch upon that probably later. Is this weaponizing food?
Well, he's weaponizing everything. I mean, look, before he was weaponizing the food, he's weaponizing information. Because look how hybrid warfare is conducted in Slovakia, in other countries on the eastern flank. I mean, so many disinformation, so many hoaxes we didn't face like we did in the last couple of months. So yeah, he's weaponizing, and he will weaponize anything that he's capable of to disrupt us, to disunite us, because that's his only tool that he has at this moment. He doesn't have as strong military as everybody thought, and maybe as he thought, so he cannot defeat Ukraine as quickly as he thought. So he will add every mean tool to gain progress. But for us, we shouldn't be afraid of it, because I think we are so strong. We just have to understand on what principles we have to work toward it, and looking for solutions. And just look at Finland and Sweden and Denmark. What happened over the last couple of weeks? I mean, we wouldn't be able to have these decisions on their security if not for this. So we see that even though we don't like it and we don't think it's right, this aggression, but it's actually activating a post-process that we were not willing, we didn't have the courage to do. And this gives us great hope of, if we follow the same principles, that we'll be able to achieve. And the food, as we were discussing, there is solutions to it. But we need more partners, because the port of Odessa will be a great training for us, whether we are capable to secure the security of Ukraine and at the same time allow the Ukrainians to export. If we achieve this, this is a big step forward. But we'll need other partners into this who will secure the waters of the sea.
The question from Alexandra Brozovsky, apologies if I mispronounced the name. Question to both speakers. Putin will ask a price for unblocking the Black Sea ports. Would you be ready to lift EU sanctions in exchange, as he asked? Chancellor, you had a call recently with Vladimir Putin, and you said that Putin was entirely aware of the issue of food security, also saying that he was giving signals, he was ready to allow some exports over seaports, but that depends on lifting the sanctions.
You know, he said the same to Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron. They phoned him after my call. He didn't mention the sanctions when he talked about that he will allow to export the corn out of the harbors on the Black Sea. But you know, the question always is, if you talk to the president of the Russian Federation, is how far we can trust. But I think we have to do different things. So it's like Eduard said, Odessa is very important to free. On the other hand, nobody of us knows how long does it take. The world needs the corn now. So we have, I think, to do parallel things. And we have to try to find out if he is really a partner when in the question of bringing out the corn or not. So
yeah, but how to find that out?
I think, you know...
Because this is a very high price to pay if you're testing, seeing whether there is trust or not, and if that doesn't work, the price gets...
No question of sanctions in the question of bringing out the corn. I think this must be important in this theme. I think we need the United Nations. Yeah, the Secretary General now is trying his best, and let's see how far we can go.
Prime Minister, your take on
Well,
this?
I think the sanctions should not be definitely a question of whether he will free the port or not. This is a separate issue. This is totally separate issue. It's because of his aggression. So, and even, I mean, there is totally separate issue. So we have to push the room. That's why I say we need other partners that will come into the room and will push the sides aside and say, well, it's not about trading between the EU and Russia. What do you trade? And that's what opens the space. There is security of other partners who come in and say, okay, because right now this is you two partners, you cannot, and we are not actually negotiating. There's not really any negotiations happening because Vladimir Putin is not allowing those negotiations with anybody. He's not negotiating. We have to realize he's not negotiating. He's performing his plan. I didn't see any sign of hope that he would be negotiating. So we need to free the port by third force that will allow the security as an arbiter, and that's how we can get the grain. And we have to do it parallelly as we get the grain on the green lines as well, because we have to do every scenario. We cannot choose, okay, let's put all the coins on one scenario. All the scenarios we can make together, we have to do at the same time, because only then we can succeed. It's such a difficult situation. There is so little answer at this moment, so many questions, but only if we work hard and we look for new answers together, then we'll be able to succeed.
A brief follow-up question, and then we're going to get the questions from the audience. You said that he is not willing to negotiate. Do you think there is no negotiations in sight at all as of now? Or you still believe in some sort of sit-down and diplomatic?
We always have to hope for negotiations. We always have to be open to it, which we are, but we don't see it from the other side.
And then the second quick follow-up, what do you think it would take for Vladimir Putin to actually agree? When would be the moment? What should happen for him to sit down and agree?
Well, honestly, I think this is a very good question. I don't have an answer, and I don't know if anybody has. We have to try everything possible to push him. At the same time, we have to try everything possible to respond immediately if we are not successful of pushing him, because we don't have time to wait for his response. It's so crucial, important timing. That it's like the bomb is clicking right now. So that's why we have to work so actively. And we are not able to allow any fatigue on our side. We have to say that to ourselves, because yet we will get tired, we will get frustrated. So what? It doesn't matter. We have to be focused for our goal, and that's the win, that's the peace, that's the security of the whole world, because that's what is shaking right now. And we see new legs will start to shake soon after. So we have to go afterwards, and we have to be very focused. There's no time for being frustrated. Motivated and go for the long run. And prepare. Somebody said that, I don't know if it was here or somewhere else, that Putin is running a marathon.
Yes.
So we cannot run, Mateusz said that actually at the council. He's running a marathon, so we cannot think that we'll run a sprint. We have to prepare ourselves. While we're running, we have to prepare that we'll be running for a marathon, which is quite complicated once you start to run a short run and then you realize you are into a marathon. So that's where we are right now.
Yeah, it's, the reason why is autocrats think in decades. We think into the next elections,
Yeah,
but autocrats not. So that's the tricky situation now, that the sanctions will be or are very strong now against the Russian Federation. You don't see it now in the field, but you will see it in the future. And I think what we have to do is now also to find allies, like, for example, President Eduard. The peace talks in Istanbul now are stopped, but maybe there's a chance that they will go on in the future. And then I talked to the president of the International Red Cross if in the question of war prisoners exchange is also necessary, And there are some talks now. And it is like you said, Eduard, we have to push and to find any possibility that both parties talk to each other, not we decide what the future of Ukraine is. I think this is very important. So we have to bring them together, but not we talk with the Russian Federation about the future of Ukraine. I think this is also important.
Right, let's take a few questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand so that we could see. Not yet. Yes, please, here. We have, could you please just stand up as well? Would you kindly, and introduce yourself, please.
I'm not sure if it's working. I decided to jump in. Michał Baranowski, German Marshall Fund of the United States, Warsaw. Prime Minister, you mentioned a possibility of third party helping with the access to Odessa. If you could elaborate on the scenario in which President Putin does not allow the access the way we would want to see, hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of people would die. How do we do it with the cooperation from Ukraine, but without the cooperation from Russia, that we actually can open the ports? Thanks.
Well, as in any conflict, if there is tension between two parties, you need somebody who is third, who has certain trust of both the parties. So that's where we need to call either United Nations or some specific, I don't know if it's going to be Turkey or somebody, to call in and say, okay, we both trust you enough that you will be enough guarantor for securing the room in between. So this is what we're calling for. And I think there is being discussion already. This scenario is being elaborated at the highest level of the leaders, and I think it will be introduced within a couple weeks and days, I think. So that's what I hear. But that's the main basic principle, I think. That's what we have to apply. As I said, we have to mobilize all the global players, because what we see, it's all intertwined. It's like the whole world must start to realize, especially with this famine coming, because it's like a domino, and it's going to go on. So we have to be really very, very sensitive to it and realize, okay, let's put our local issues aside and let's focus on this risk of domino and sit together and find a solution, which is a great, on the other hand, it's a great unification opportunity for this world, like there wasn't before, and we are in the prevention phase, which is so good again. We just have to realize what we are playing for and what we are playing about. If we do realize it now, early enough, and we allow ourselves to put our local quarrels aside, then we get such a unity like this world hasn't seen for a long time, and in such a great extent and manner. So I think it's a great opportunity that we're facing.
Please just stand up and introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Pavel Demeš. I am Slovak foreign policy analyst, and would like to ask you, Chancellor, a question which will be a bit personal about you and Vladimir Putin. There is always temptation by Western leaders to find some way of approaching the president of Russia. George Bush, when he invited him to his ranch, he said that he looked into his eyes and these people are demonizing him, but he saw soul after looking into his eyes. Then Barack Obama wanted to have reset. Then all kinds of other people tried throughout 2 decades. You tried as well, and your visit to Moscow was a bit controversial. Some people were surprised you went, and you look into his eyes. What you saw, and do you think that you have some extra position now to be like one of the EU leaders who have special avenue to him when it comes to have some negotiations of tough issues, because we are still in very acute phase where we don't know. So do you have special relations to Vladimir Putin?
No, I don't have any special relations to him, but I think it's necessary also in conflicts to talk to both sides. When I decided to go first to Ukraine, afterwards to President Putin, I talked about that with the President of the Commission, with the President of the Council, with the Chancellor of Germany, with the President of Poland, because he's one of the strongest critics about that. And well, when I was there, I saw a man who is in his own war logic. Before I go to Moscow, I was in Bucha, and it was the first time in my life when I saw a mass grave. And I think it was necessary and it was right to confrontate him with that. I think it's necessary to talk not only with a phone call, it's only necessary, to look each other into the eyes. And the Austrian position is really new now, because in former times we always or often declared because of our neutrality it's not possible to do that or the other things. Now we are really clear. We decided all sanctions. We support the delivering of ammunition and weapons. We can do it ourselves, but we support it. And I think if you have an opinion, you have to talk about that. And yeah, you have to confront him with that. And you have to always try to find a new way how to reach this person in finding a kind of mechanism for a ceasefire or to end the war. And this is the reason why the International Red Cross is talking to both sides, also to the aggressor. It's necessary, because on the other way, there will be no war prisoners exchange. And the Secretary General of the United Nations is doing the same. I'm not naive. It was not a friendly talk. But I think, yes, it's not now the time to feel comfortable. Yeah, we have to risk something for peace and the ceasefire. We have to risk something for the people in the Ukraine. And yeah, we have to do more than we do now. And maybe there were discussions, yeah, also, yeah. I think it doesn't matter. I think in democracies it's normal that there are discussions. It's necessary. This is democracy. There are no discussions in the Russian Federation. That's a pity. So I think other chancellors, prime ministers should do the same. We have to confront him. We have to bring him back to the table to talk to Zelensky himself. Because what kind of scenario do we have for the end of this conflict? And all conflicts ended with negotiations. There can be a victory, but you have to negotiate what is after this. And in the question of wheat, I told it before, we don't have time. We have to find solutions now. And it's really a big question, what does this mean for the security in Europe? I will tell you something. We are in a special position in Austria, more than Slovakia is. Now we protect more than 75,000 Ukrainians. And in the same time, I have 21,000 asylum seekers from all over the world. Syria, Afghanistan, 21,000 now. You know what does this mean for the end of the year? So it's a security question. What does it mean if there is hunger on the world? If North Africa is destabilized? And so I think it's necessary here to share all informations, and everyone has to do more that this war ends. First of all, Putin. And we all have to try to push him, to bring him to this, to say, stop, not anymore. I think, yeah, that's the way.
Prime Minister, briefly, your conclusion.
Well, we see, even with this discussion, that we are facing bigger and bigger challenges. I'm not saying problems, because we have to look at this as challenges. But what we see is also the importance of forums like this, because this forum actually opened two big topics. It opened the topic of reconstruction of Ukraine, which we thought that's going to be the final discussion we'll have. War in Ukraine and then reconstruction. Now we see it's getting much bigger, and we still might not see some things that will come afterwards. Because we saw energy, now we saw war, and now we're starting to see famine, which is a global problem. So it's very good that we started to speak about the reconstruction, because very much needed for the European dimension. But the global dimension that was opened on this forum must sound, and we need forums like this, where people from all over the world get together, put themselves into seeking solutions, and bringing answers to the challenges. Quickly, comprehensively, that's our task. So I think the next year we're going to see many forums like this, where we have to be very serious about it, because the forums in the past were more like discussion, and we're thinking of a vision. Now we are building vision while we live it. That's a totally different dimension. So that's why thank you also to this forum, and thank you to you, that you opened these important questions to us, but you heard it as well. Let's look for the solutions together, and let's involve much more global players into it.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the speakers. Thanks so much for being here for this session. Thanks for your view, and from all of us here in the room and also streaming. Thank you very much, Chancellor, Prime Minister.
Thank you.
Our next session starts straight away and will be led by Robin Shepherd, and it begins with a short video.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next session is about to begin. Please welcome Robin Shepherd to the stage.
Hello, everybody. This is a fake mic. I can actually speak you, but I don't use it. Good late afternoon, good early evening. By now, you already know the drill. You can use your Slido, Globsec loves Slido. There will also be opportunities to ask questions using a handheld mic. The session will last for about 60 minutes. I just wanted to say that this session is taking place in cooperation between Globsec and the Václav Havel Library in Prague, and within the framework of the Havel-Albright Transatlantic Dialogues, which started last year at Globsec as the Václav Havel Transatlantic Dialogues. And after the passing of Secretary of State Madeleine Albright a little earlier this year, it was renamed. I'd like to welcome our panelists. And I'll introduce them when they've sat down. And first, or as they're walking in, the first person you see is Natalia Arno, who's president of the Free Russia Foundation. And then we have, to her left, Damon Wilson, who's president and CEO of the National Endowment for Democracy. Next to Damon is Maria Mezentseva, a member of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. And then we have, we mentioned the Albright Havel Dialogues. We have Michal Žantovský, who's the executive director of the Václav Havel Library. And last but by no means least, it's a pleasure to welcome also Aya Chebbi, who's a former African Union Youth Envoy, founder and chair of the Nala Feminist Collective. And Aya, I believe you're from Tunis, right?
Yes.
Welcome. Actually, three of the people, including myself, live in Washington, D.C., and this is obviously a potentially very wide-ranging discussion, and actually that's a good thing. It's obviously the case that we're going to focus quite a bit of attention on the country 450 kilometers or so to our east, and yet there's a big world out there with lots of challenges to democracies, and also challenges within our own nations, countries. I'm British, obviously, though I live in the United States, which think of themselves as established democracies, and yet, as we've seen in recent years, there have been some significant challenges that we've all had to cope with. I mentioned Washington because if you've been to Washington, D.C., and many of you will have done, you'll know a bookshop called Kramer Books. It's just up from DuPont Circle on Connecticut Avenue. And I was in Kramer's about 10 days ago, and I happened to notice this. You know how publishers, when they're they're sort of doing a new promotion for an old book, they'll put something in a sort of a stack and various windows. And I noticed it was Francis Fukuyama's The End of History, and it's because it's 30 years since its initial publication as a book. It was an essay before that. And I also noticed, and it made me chuckle slightly, even though I have a huge amount of respect for Francis Fukuyama, and this is not going to be a mocking story in the end, as you'll see. It said, with a new afterword by Francis Fukuyama. And I was thinking, so you read the book, and then the new article says, you know when I said the end of history? And it kind of, it's for the last, in fact, Damon was on the same panel last year at GlobSec, and Fukuyama was on that panel. And obviously he's taken a lot of stick for that. And yet, there is a very long history of serious thinkers who have believed that the march of freedom is ultimately inevitable. Alexis de Tocqueville famously wrote The Democracy in America, and if you ever read the introduction, you'll find a highly deterministic rendition of history, where that march of freedom is, to sort of use Kantian and Hegelian terminology, is thought to be imminent in the historical process, and that we will one day all be free. Many people will be aware of the famous line from Martin Luther King when he said, "We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Now, that, when we're considering the events in Ukraine today, when we look at the Uyghurs in China, when we look at events in a lot of the African continent, Eritrea is a quotable example, but there are many others as well. When we look at Russia, of course, it's hard and even potentially highly optimistic to say that we're doing anything other than 2 steps forward and 1.95 steps backwards. But at least, and I'll come to you, Damon, as president of the National Endowment of Democracy, if we're looking for any cause for optimism, I mean, Fukuyama's book, perhaps retitled The End of History in the End, is there still hope that the trajectory that we all hoped we were on is still present, even though we have to accept it's going to take quite a bit longer than we initially might have thought?
Thank you so much. It is fantastic to be back here at GlobSec and to be here with this extraordinary group to talk about, I think, what is an existential, consequential issue of our time. And you mentioned quite a few people that are, I think, really important to the conversation. I am profoundly optimistic. When I came back from spending a week in Ukraine 2 weeks ago, when I talked to activists from Tunisia and Sudan, when I meet with Hong Kongers and Uyghurs, as we have met with many Russians that have had to flee under Vladimir Putin, in very difficult, tough circumstances that can lead to depression, cynicism, when I see this resolve and the determination of brave people around the world to struggle against all odds, it's a luxury for us to be where we are. And when to see that, it makes me extraordinarily optimistic to understand that demand, that quench, that quest for some type of individual liberty and dignity, it is powerful. It is a powerful force. And people are restless right now. So you mentioned, first of all, Frank Fukuyama is a good friend. And in many respects, you can make fun of the end of history. 30 years ago when he published that book. But look at what the extent to which Daniel Ortega to Vladimir Putin the extent they go through to mock and imitate a democracy, election process. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping coming together to talk about their democracies. And in some respects, it gives me hope because we have won the existential argument that legitimacy doesn't come from your power or from God. Legitimacy really comes from popular will. And we've seen dictators and autocrats kind of almost cede that fundamental argument and then work to twist and manipulate it. Well, Frank wrote that book 30 years ago. 40 years ago, next week, President Reagan gave the Westminster Address. in which he said democracy is not a fragile flower, but we have to act to support an infrastructure for global democracy. And he laid out what he called both the thinking around a plan and a hope that ultimately would lead to Marxism and Leninism on the ash heap of history 40 years ago. Think about the state of democracy 40 years ago when he gave that address. He seemed a little crazy, maybe. And yet, within 10 years, Frank Fukuyama's book, I mean, you see what has happened. And so we don't take this for granted. We're in a tough time right now. We are, as Ann Applebaum, who's on my board, puts it, the bad guys are winning. We're in 16 years of a democratic recession documented by Freedom House. But even more acutely, the past decade has been characterized by sharp authoritarian repression, turbocharged by technology, playing on disinformation to polarize societies with the whiplash of erosion in much of the democratic established democracies. And yet, I'm going to close by saying I am squarely where Madeleine Albright was before she passed away. Her last major publication in Foreign Affairs was called The Coming Democratic Revival. And it recognized the tough time we're in, but it recognized that resiliency for the demand of democracy. And it was also an exhortation for all of us to look at the sacrifice from the Ukrainians to others around the world. Look at what happened in Hong Kong last year. To understand that working together, it's our goal to help support those on the front lines to end this democratic recession, and to be unequivocal about understanding that our goal is to be part of helping to support, ultimately, a fourth historic democratic wave. It doesn't just happen. It happens because of all those courageous people, some of whom are on this stage, that give me the optimism about the future.
I think that's a fascinating point about this fourth wave, and it also, and I'm going to turn to you, but I want to do this very carefully because Maria Mezentseva, because I'm very well aware, because I happen to have spent a lot of time in Ukraine and I've followed the process of democracy and the ebbs and flows that have gone on in Ukraine. I was speaking today to a number of people who reminded us that prior to February the 24th, in fact last year, there were attempts to imprison Petro Poroshenko on preposterous charges that he had betrayed the nation to Russia. There has been historically a corruption problem. Now, this is not to criticize a country that is in distress, but in a sense that the creative destruction that nobody would have wished upon Ukraine. How does Ukraine's democracy come through this crisis stronger? Clearly, your country is under military occupation, military threat, and we've heard an awful lot about that, and rightly so, at this conference. But do you believe that in a sort of Schumpeterian sense of creative destruction, that you will emerge as a much stronger democracy after this crisis is over and after, hopefully, you've won this war?
Thank you for the question. I think, colleagues, we shouldn't come here with some particular instances of corruption, anti-corruption things and cases, which one of the personalities that has been mentioned by you, the chairman. We should talk about the achievements we've been through, and that the anti-corruption and democratic mechanisms and architecture, which is one of the most sophisticated anti-corruption architecture in a democratic state within EU as well, and a little bit beyond, is in Ukraine. The Parliament of the Ninth Convocation has been one of the most reactive and prominent in establishing anti-corruption court, in following all the necessities to make our reports and our activities way more transparent than they have been ever in 30 years of our independence. And I think there has to be a very clarity on that, because the corruption has been pointed out for us in the, let's say, top 5 priorities for the reforms to be conducted. But we never stopped. And we've became, I can say it as a parliamentarian, because we are reading these draft laws. You might not be very deep into the details of them, but they are at place, and they are forming our society. You can't just be using all techniques of this, stories. Well, I'll do something with the chocolate and comment to some official. I mean, I'm trying to give an example how it used to be. Well, I was born when I'm being asked, "How old are you, Maria?" I was born on the year of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I've been witnessing the development of Ukraine. In the 90s and 2000s, there was more or less the same technologies of conducting the management of the countries. Ukraine went way beyond, because the topic of our panel is to discuss how democratic we are. Are we remaining democratic? And definitely war is not a reason to stop the reforms going. And the association agreement that we have signed as a third country to the EU, it's been signed by many others, I want to emphasize was one of the most sophisticated ones. And the anti-corruption law over there was implemented within the first years, being enshrined in our, I think, code of new religion, which is called freedom at the first place. And the freedom is also in this specific understanding. What are we fighting for? I would also emphasize here I mean, I know it's very boring for you to listen to the procurement law and all that, but it matters, because procurement comes into Ministry of Defense. It comes to every local society. It came with decentralization, one of the most prominent reforms, which gave the powers to small towns, villages. Those villages and towns which are fighting today, even though they are besieged, they are ruled by the, I believe, best and outstanding mayors who are trying to preserve not only something we've built within this 30 years, but to preserve something that was created back in 1950s here in the subcontinent of Europe.
I mean, that's partly what I'm driving at, is that amid the terrible adversity, the embedding of the democratic spirit in the national consciousness, precisely because of this terrible assault, unprovoked war launched by Putin, and still the democratic processes are developing, even in spite of that. This is the title of this is struggles on the front line. Can democracies stop tyranny? Well, if you can sustain democracy and even enhance democracy under the conditions that you're in, then that gives even more hope to people around the world. And, there's this discussion about joining the European Union, and some countries be in favor, some not. It'll take a long time.
No, everyone has to be in favor. That's a fair discussion. Everyone has to be in favor, because it's I'm sorry, I can't be silent on that. I've dedicated 13 years of my professional life to the European integration topic, and that's a political decision, colleagues. Those countries who are not standing with us right now did not go through the process of enlargement. They are in the club of the founding members, and I'm not going to be aiming them, and everyone knows who I'm talking about. But that's important, because it's a political decision. There are member states who did not fulfill Copenhagen criteria, so didn't go through the losses we're going through. And the President Zelensky was clear at the first panel of discussion when he was talking in numbers, how many losses we are having daily. But it's not about that. It's about the fact that we are implementing all those laws, and we are contributing to the global security, energy sector, Green Deal, and all that. So that has to happen on the 24th of June. I believe in that.
Yeah, and it's certainly true. If you look at the Transparency International rankings, there are several countries in the European Union right now that have a terrible record on corruption. So very much so. I promised everybody that we're not going to just talk about Ukraine and Central Eastern Europe. We are going to widen this, but it does make some sense to come back now to Russia. And, if the Ukrainians can sustain and develop and enhance a democracy even under these awful conditions that obviously are created by Vladimir Putin's war of aggression. Is there any hope at all in Russia? I mean, a part of the whole thing, most people who look at the conflict will say, look, at the end of the day, there's going to be a stalemate, and the only way to break the stalemate is regime change in Russia, but which means a lot more than just getting rid of Vladimir Putin. It means an entire paradigm shift in the way that the Russian political system and thought processes are constructed. Your organization is called Free Russia. I mean, is that an imperative? Free Russia? How will you go about doing it, and what hope? Again, we're looking for some glimmers of hope in what looks to be a very difficult situation.
Thank you so much, Robin. And yes, my organization is called Free Russia Foundation, and this is a goal, this is a vision, this is a mission, and the biggest achievement will be not to have the reason for such an organization, because Russia will be truly free. I want to thank organizers of GlobSec. It's very important for us, pro-democracy Russians, to be here, and so that our voices are being heard by the West, by Ukrainians, by other pro-democracy Russians and those who are thinking about joining us. I also want to thank the city of Bratislava for becoming the 5th place in the world commemorating the memory of a slain Russian opposition leader, Boris Nemtsov. He's a symbol of our struggle for freedom. He was a very big supporter and friend of Ukraine. And it's my honor to be on this panel, but especially I'm honored to be on the same panel with Maria. And I wanted to say that we, anti-war, anti-regime, pro-democracy Russians, we stand with Ukraine. We support you, not only with the words, but with actions. We admire your bravery and your commitment to democratic values. And the victory of Ukraine is very, very, very crucial for us. And I mean total, complete victory of Ukraine and a total, complete failure of Putin. Not just some stopping of the war somehow or some kind of a truce with some concessions of preconditions, but total and complete failure by Putin's regime. This is very important. And we are very concerned about some voices here in the West. It's already 100 days of the war. Always there is fatigues, we know, after any crisis, any war, anything. People get tired of listening to such horrible news. But for us, it's very important that there are no voices or those supporters or Putin's empathizers who are calling for some solutions to try to save his face. I can assure you there is no face there, there is only Botox. And this Botox of aggression, repressions, and propaganda doesn't deserve to be saved. We, pro-democracy Russians, we were the first victims of the Kremlin. Putin occupied Russia first. All these years we were jailed, prosecuted, attempted to murdered, forced into exile. We were telling all the time how corrupt and brutal and kleptocratic and dangerous and insane this regime is. It was very difficult for us to advocate for sanctions. I wish all these sanctions were adopted in 2008 or at least in 2014. It was very difficult for us with our Ukrainian partners in 2019 to advocate against Nord Stream 2. Many people in many European capitals were telling us it's just, again, realpolitik, business as usual, this is trade, this is important. It's been very difficult for us since the beginning of creation of our organization in 2014 to advocate for political prisoners, including Ukrainian hostages of the Kremlin. We had a lot of supporters, but it was very, very difficult to keep this on the agenda of people all the time. We have always said that this regime is illegitimate. We have never had free and fair elections under Putin. The list of Putin's crimes is so long, and even before the war it was already long and enough not to consider him as a president of Russia and not to shake hands with him for the democratic leaders. Before February 24th, it was again very difficult for us to have this narrative of illegitimacy of this regime. I'm glad that now, at least, this word regime change is not as radical as it sounded for many people and organizations all these years. On February 24th, for all of us, pro-democracy Russians, it's the most terrible scenario, the most terrible nightmare that we still cannot believe that is happening. Every morning I wake up and at first I need to even to realize that, yes, this is happening, this is... While, as I said, we were the first victims of Putin's regime, and we were warning about his danger of his regime, about how he, again, will attack neighbors eventually, that he won't stop at the domestic repressions, and will continue with all this malign activity, influence campaigns in the West. We are also not only victims of the regime, we are also agents of change. And right now, Russian civil society, independent media, a pro-democracy Russian movement is transiting into exile. Even inside Russia, there are a lot of voices that are not afraid to speak out despite all terrible repressions. You cannot even say the word "the war" in Russia. You can be in jail for 15 years. And still, there are a lot of people speaking out and doing a lot of things. All of us are trying to do anything we can for Ukraine, for Ukrainians, understanding this is our responsibility. This is our, we are on the right side of history. We are together with the democratic world. This is our common goal, to get rid of this regime. And it's important to think not only about present that Putin deprived us from, not only about this distorted past that he is implementing, but about future. He deprived us of a normal future. We need to do a lot of work now to rebuild Russia from its scratches, from its disgrace. All of us, those who still have these relations with Ukrainians, it's very important for us to save these relations, to show that, again, we are with you, we are together with you, we are doing everything what we can to stop this monster. And I hope that the democratic world understands the value of pro-democracy Russians, because, yes, we need the second front inside Russia. We need to grow anti-war movement inside Russia. It's difficult, it's possible, but the Ukraine's future, global and regional stability won't be sustainable, won't be stable if Putin's regime will continue in whatever format, if it's Iran or North Korea or something. The world stability, democracy and everything depends on this regime change, on democratization of Russia. Thank you.
We'll come back to this, sort of the glimmers of hope, and also what we can do to what I believe Damon described as the potential for a fourth democratic revolution. But before we do, there's a couple of other angles to throw into this discussion. And Aya, I wanted to turn to you from Tunisia, but don't feel limited to talk about Tunisia. Just remind people, it's very easy when a lot of the global discussion about democracy centers on China and Russia, obviously, that Africa, and North Africa, but the whole of Africa often can just slip off the people's agenda. But there's a lot going on the continent of Africa. And I'm not asking you to summarize every single thing that's going on, but perhaps starting off with Tunisia, how are things looking in Tunisia right now, and what sort of what first of all is going on, and secondly, is there anything that we're very fond of people coming from Western countries saying about what you can learn from us? What can the rest of the world learn from your experience about how to push a democratic process forward?
Thank you so much. First of all, this room is really hot. Is anybody else really hot here? And the topic is really hot. Before I start, I am a Pan-African, and what Pan-Africanism means is that my liberation is your liberation. My struggle is your struggle. And because we fought for independence and the liberation movements, we believe in people's self-determination. And so I want to start by, as an African, standing in solidarity with activists in Russia and in Ukraine for your struggles. And I think international solidarity and global solidarity is important to not make it a regional issues. And I think that's why Africa is blocked in its regional issues. What's happening here is blocked in its regional issues and so on. So I think we need to broaden the discussion to being a human first. And all of us want freedom and dignity. Now, to your question to Damon when he was speaking, I was thinking, how can I not be optimistic when I did the revolution in my country? And when the millennials are and will, I think, take more and more power. I don't know how many, I see many millennial faces here. How many people under 35 here? It's okay, we'll not judge you if you feel young. Yeah, I think...
Over 35?
I think we should recognize and not forget that the past 10 years or 12 years. We talk a lot about multi-party system movement in Africa in the 90s, but we don't talk much about how revolution started the past decade and millennials are rising up for democracy. Because the slogan we use in the street in Tunisia is شغل حرية كرامة وطنية, jobs, freedom, dignity. The revolution of dignity in Ukraine in 2014 was rising for the same. I think we need to ground ourselves back to what our generation wants and the future we want, which is about freedom. The revolution in Tunisia that I took part in 2011, which inspired movements across the world, and we shouldn't forget about Yemen and Bahrain and Syria and Libya and Egypt and Occupy movement across the world. I think it's an ongoing campaign. We can't say that, yeah, we did the revolution, regime change, we're on the right track. And maybe to mention 3 lessons we learned, as you said, learning from our lessons. I think the first is people power. We talk a lot about in this forum, and since the morning I'm hearing political elite, what to do, EU, what to do, policymakers, what to do, but who are on the front line of revolutions? There are people. They're young people, they're women, they're trade unions, they're diverse range of actors who come together rising for a better future for their countries. And I think we underestimate people power and people consciousness to make change, and that's the only way for lasting democracy. If you look at history, you'll find that any regime change through nonviolent resistance is more likely to last than armed struggle, right? So first lesson, people power and investing in people movements. And maybe even, replacing all these or dismantle all this war machine with the diplomacy of people, right? Because we talk a lot about how we fix things in military way. I think the second lesson is then, once we do regime change, the democratic transition. What do we need? What are the ingredients we need for democratic transition? And I think the mistake that the West does is they impose a fit size for all type of democracy. Democracy for me is a value. It's not it's a system of values. We need freedoms, we need freedom of assembly, of speech, of press, and so on and so forth. But the system of democracy that we need, it's for the people to decide and sign. And that's what happened in Tunisia in 2011. That's what happens in many African countries. Western powers come and say, we want elections. Right? So Sudan revolution, we want election immediately. Mali, we want election immediately. Libya, we want election immediately. Tunisia, come on, write your constitution and have elections. So I think election is not enough, and electoral democracy cannot be reduced to that. And people need time to figure out what kind of system works. And that's how I analyze what's happening in Tunisia. When people see after 12 years, what happened? We thought you're, the rising democracy in the region. I think it's work in progress, and it's a campaign that started in 2011, but that continues. I think also the West, when they impose these kind of one-size-fits-all, we fall, especially in Africa, under coups, right? So we have, since independence, 214 coup attempts. Half of them succeeded and half failed. And when you see coups happening, it's a cycle. And then another coup, and then another coup. Again, because it doesn't come from people power and a sustainable way of putting in place democratic institutions. The last lesson I would say is digital, everything digital. I actually started as a blogger, activist when the revolution started, and everything digital empowered me. Funny enough, Tunisian were the first to turn social media into a tool for social change. So on Facebook in 2011, you would receive an event invite for your graduation party, but it was the first event we did for protesting in front of the Ministry of Interior, right? So we shifted how we use everything digital into political mobilization. And you see now all the politicians, using these platforms, and even dictators and terrorists, and all of them using these platforms. But if we look back and see the difference maybe between 21st century peaceful revolution and others, it's everything digital. And the lesson I think we learned through digital is that it helps you expose and delegitimize corrupt information and the system you want to stand up against, but also it's just a tool, right? If you don't go offline, if we don't network here and find solutions, remaining behind our screens will not change things. So I think to sum it up, for me, there is a broader conversation about democracy that needs to be analyzed from the perspective of the future of democracy, and not what is happening now, of course, learning from what we failed on, but I don't think we ask much the millennial and Generation Z, what is the future you want? Maybe the future of the leaders who are in power right now are about monetary value and militarization, but the future we want is about freedom. And I think that intergenerational conversation needs to happen because we need intergenerational co-leadership. I live in a continent where the average age of African leaders is 64, and the average age of the population is almost 20. We have more than 40 years gap in generations. I'm going to take power. I'm not going to stand there and allow these long-standing men, staying in power. And I think that starts with the conversation of the future we want, the Africa we want, the Ukraine we want, the Russia we want. And I hope, deconstructing these concepts, we always come back to what is, the future generations want, because we need to care. And that's what really, as much as I'm optimistic, that what really disappoints me when I see leaders care only about today and don't care about the future.
Thanks. And you've also raised a couple of the points that I want to come to in sort of, I think we're getting in this discussion, if there is going to be a fourth democratic revolution, to some of the points you raised, which are very specific about how that kind of revolution would be different in practice. But another thing you mentioned was people power and the people being at the forefront of these revolutions. Well, Mikhail Žantovský on the 17th of November 1989 joined hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of his fellow citizens to stand up to a communist dictatorship and overthrew it. Now, feel free to speak to that if you still believe there are lessons from that we can take for the present day around the world. But there's also the question, and we talked about it very briefly in the back there, that the people aren't necessarily always, all of them, democratic, are they? So what happens, and we've seen this in our own democracies, when large sections of our own populations may be in favor of voting in elections, but they don't necessarily believe in a lot of the other things which make elections real, such as freedom of speech and truthful discourse and all this kind of thing. So, Mikhail, if you want to speak to that, I think I know this is something close to your heart. So,
Robin, thank you. But these are 2 5-hour-long topics.
Well, every single one of these is a 5-hour-long. So,
okay, I'll try. I have enormous respect for not only the heroism and courage of the Ukrainian people defending their country, but also for their commitment to democracy, and the same respect for the struggle of Russian human rights defenders and freedom fighters, and the same for the advocates of liberation and people power in Africa. But I'm afraid I still take a slightly more jaundiced view of the progress of democracy than my friend Damon, although I admire his sunny nature. And the reason is that, as every military strategist will tell you, the most dangerous attack is always not from across the front line, but from the rear. And Václav Havel wrote 50 years ago, I think he wrote, it is a natural disadvantage of democracy that it ties the hands of those who wish it well, but it offers unlimited opportunities to those who do not take it seriously. And I'm afraid we are in this situation, and for too long a time we have ignored and overlooked the activities of those among us in the democratic countries who do not take democracy seriously. And many of them, after the Putin attack against Ukraine, have burrowed themselves in the woodwork and were biding their time. And now, 3 months later, some of them are, climbing out again. And it's not a nice picture. You and I, Robin, lived in London for quite a long time. I for 6 years, and we both know that it was not, in those days, it was not called Londongrad for nothing. And there were billions and hundreds of billions of pounds or dollars or never mind rubles, and going in to banks, to investments, to companies, undermining the British political parties and the structure. And we pretended like nothing was going on. I once went to a bank in London and tried to deposit, I think, $1,000 in cash. Well, they almost...
I thought you were going to say $1 billion for a Russian oligarch.
No. Well, this was me. And they almost called a SWAT team on me. And now I have learned that about the same time, the daughter of the mistress of Sergei Lavrov bought a house in London for £2.5 million in cash. Would you believe it? No. And some of those people have been helping Putin with his gas and oil exports for years, well aware that they were helping weaponizing oil and gas as a weapon. Now, I'm sorry, but I'm over 35, as you may have noticed, but in the old world that I remember, this is called treason, and we are still being quite nice about it. And now it turns out that some of the personal sanctions that we imposed on some of the Putin's friends and collaborators have very little effect, because these people are practically penniless. They don't owe anything. I mean, the money, whatever they had, is somewhere out there, but nobody knows where. And this is not only helping the enemy, the Putin regime, etc., but it's doing even more damage to what you spoke about, to the public opinion, to trust in democracy, to trust in our democratic institutions, because the ordinary folks, seeing this, will say, naturally, the game is fixed, the system is rotten, and what's so great about democracy, and you can see it in some countries on the public opinion numbers. So, in the end, Madeleine Albright, I'm grateful that you mentioned her in the beginning, because this dialogue is in her honor too. Well, she was one of the main initiators behind the conference called the Community of Democracies in Warsaw in 2000. Now, President Biden called the Summit of Democracies 20 years later to Washington last December. I'm afraid that, not much has moved forward since then. And the last, on occasions like this, and again, most of you are too young to remember it, I remember my favorite Pogo cartoon, in which Pogo, which is an animal comics figure in the cartoon, comes and says in a famous paraphrase, we have found the enemy, and the enemy is us. And this disrupts my sleep at night. Thank you.
Precisely as Michal said at the beginning in answer to the question, there is so much to discuss here because it is one of the fundamental questions of our age. Unfortunately, we've got about 10, 15 minutes or so, 15 if we can edge things a little bit, because we started late. But I want to take some questions from the audience. And if we could kind of focus them on this question of what we can actually do to affect this fourth wave, this fourth revolution, this fourth new movement of democracy. And, some of the points that Aya raised, some of the points that Damon raised, and some of the lessons from Ukraine, which I think I repeat, to actually be developing a democracy in the most adverse conditions imaginable. So if you could focus on those particular kinds of questions, at least we have some structure in what is otherwise a fascinating but enormously wide-ranging discussion. Please.
Hello, my name is Andrei Dmitriev. I am from Belarus. And of course, all our hearts with Ukraine today. And you know how Belarusians we take it personally, because Belarusians expressed its will for democracy 2 years ago. And since that, it's a heavily repressed society by authority. You know it perfectly. And thousands in jail. So, but I just want to reflect on some words has been said here, which I think is important. Tyrannies and tyrants, they take their tyranny seriously. They invest in that on everyday basis. They invest in propaganda, they invest in force, they invest on support base, and we see it all over the world. And I think in order to have a chance for democracies to win, we need to take democracy seriously. In some Marx vision, he said that first is economy and then at politics. You remember it, yes? But I think he was wrong. What we see clearly today, that first is the politics, first is the values, and then is economy and on the rest. Because when Putin's saying today that he is afraid and that NATO is closer to his border, what we see, that its democracy is closer to his border. And that's what they're afraid, whatever Putin or Lukashenko. So I would say, I think it's important to be united, and I think it's important to take seriously democracy and invest on that both inside and outside. So my question maybe to all of the panelists today, like, do you feel that all situations that happening today, war and other things, that investing in your society in beliefs in democracy, or it's other versa? People are losing their faith in democracy and think, oh, maybe it's better just to stay in a good economic shape, for example, something like that. Thank you so much.
Okay, so let's take that question, but also, since we are running out of time and there are 5 of you, let's also feel free to answer the question, what is the single biggest thing that we could be doing now to affect democratic change, to strengthen democratic change? Perhaps, Maria, you're going to say candidate status of the European Union, but let's go first with you. Yeah. If there's something else, then we want to hear that too.
I'll try. I mean, there's so much to say, and my comment on anti-corruption was very short, so I'll take this opportunity to elaborate a little bit more in points. First of all, Živa Belarus, Slava Ukraini, freedom to Russia. And, well, colleagues, I'm sorry, but you couldn't make it. Unfortunately, the project failed. Yeah, it could have happened. We were observing you with such, beating heart. Come on, do it. It could have been a break for spreading democracy further, because Belarus wasn't the project of enlargement of EU. It's called Eastern Partnership. You were in, you were out, but it was not the choice of the people to be in and out. It was the choice of a dictator who was judging by his own narrow box thinking, same as Putin is doing right now. What we have to do, the whole project, which the whole subcontinent invested funds, freedoms, philosophy, money, cannot fail. We cannot let it happen. But it is decided in Ukraine right now, not elsewhere in the world. And investing in Ukraine, rebuilding it today, not waiting, because I've heard at different panels, so let's wait until the Liberation Day and then we start rebuilding Ukraine. No, 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 no. It's the people and societies who are right now there. It's the Ukrainians who are willing to at least replace their broken window, you know? They want to do it today so they can sleep well, not in a cold room, but in a warm one. We have to do it today. So investing in the victory of Ukraine today, and it concerns every possible means, financial, military. We know the neutral countries, they are not sending us weapons. They might talk to other ones via the mechanisms of the NATO and third countries to be doing that, but investing in it today would cost less than doing it tomorrow or the day after or later in the year. We don't want to have this fatigue for sure. Unfortunately, colleagues, you can't feel it. You can't feel what we feel. We are given born and we are dying every day, not just from the news, but from the feeling that it's not just you who can die tomorrow. It's about everything we're building. In my constituency, I've gained so much, you know, great projects and all of that. The first targets of Putin in my home city, Kharkiv, was the best children's hospital in the country, which we finished in December. And there was not the military base located there. And he hates us because we are better. Because all of us, you and us, we can develop in this common free democratic society. I truly believe that democracy has prevailed, but the failures of democracy, the fake news, and something that was given for granted, you know, taking the opportunity of buying cheap gas, of buying politicians, of like failing in our common goals of something bigger and brighter is the price we pay today. So there is no other recipe than standing together for Ukraine, and all of us can do a small thing. It's even, you know, the tweets that you put on the screen right now. Putin will read it. Well, he doesn't go on. He even have YouTube printed in front of him. He can't read and he can't watch YouTube. But whatever, too much time dedicated to him. Mm-hmm. It's not about him. It's about us, and it's about the project which will either fail or prevail. And I believe that Ukraine should prevail in the common goal of all of us. And it's the 4th of June, which is coming tomorrow, I think. And it's the International Day of commemorating all the innocent children who are dying in different wars. And I want all of us, colleagues, to stand up right now and commemorate not only children, but everyone who died in different wars, specifically, of course, in the war in Ukraine, because we haven't done so far. So if I may ask to have a moment of silence for everyone who's fighting for democracies today.
Thank you. Thank you. We are really running out of time now, but thank you. That was a very powerful intervention. Damon, I hate to do this to you because we've got so little time, but if you had to outline, you know, if you had to, Mikhail Žantovský talked about the self-critical analysis that we have to be better at in terms of if we want to strengthen our own democracies and therefore provide a better example. But what is it? What's your top priority in the National Endowment for Democracy? I mean, you've probably got 10 top priorities, but what is the single thing that you think would make the world a better place if you could succeed at doing it?
So, democratic renewal, I think, is premised, as we heard from Aya, on democratic solidarity. I think that's the premise. Democratic renewal depends on us having each other's back, that sense of democratic solidarity. That begins with helping Ukraine win this war, helping Ukrainians be victorious in protecting their freedom. But coming with that sense of renewal is a sense we've got to be confident in the values that underpin our system. We've got to be proud about what we can do to assist and support each other, even as we bring, particularly as an American, extraordinary humility to what we're doing, because Michael, I accept what you say. I don't deny any of the analysis you have. But if Madeleine Albright were here right now, she'd be challenging you and say, it is precisely because of our open, free, democratic societies that you have that conversation. We expose our faults. We hold ourselves accountable. You began with de Tocqueville, who came, Jim Clyburn is my congressman from South Carolina. He quotes de Tocqueville all the time, and he said, America's not the most enlightened country, but more often than not had a means to repair its faults. And that's what de Tocqueville saw in the essence of what we're talking about. Systems where we don't need Chinese and Russian propaganda to point to our faults. We hold ourselves accountable, relentlessly so, through that criticism, looking at our own financial complicity in kleptocratic networks, something we're beginning to understand thanks to the research that many of our Russian friends have helped to do to hold up a mirror to our own face. And we hold ourselves accountable. Activists, people power, go knock on the doors of central banks and finance ministries, and it changes. And so that premise begins, democratic renewal begins with a sense of democratic solidarity across all of us who are in that struggle, with a degree of confidence in those values and a deep sense of humility in how we go about doing it.
I really hate to do this to you guys, but if you can do in 20 seconds each. Michal first, then I, then Natalia.
The question is, what can we do specifically?
Yes.
And I think we have a demonstration of that. We can stand up for our values and show that we really believe in democracy. Luckily, after a long time, we have a government now that immediately after the Russian invasion, started acting, delivered arms, kicked out the Russians, and the prime minister was one of the first prime ministers to go to Kiev and showed the colors. And as a consequence of this, the public trust in the democratic institutions, in democracy as such, skyrocketed. It went into the 80s, yeah? So it's not that we don't do something because our people, the public opinion, does not believe in democracy. We show leadership, and the public opinion will react correspondingly.
Wonderful. Aya, 10 seconds. Again, I hate to do it to you. What do we do? One thing.
And
then Natalia, same.
I think we are at a tipping point, whether it's internationalism or extinction, because I feel that we need to replace all these military blocs with one inclusive international security framework that fights for social justice and that de-escalate tension and that fight poverty and so on. To address his question, because I think it's a valid point, a lot of people say that, oh, Africans don't deserve democracy, they deserve the dictatorship, and they don't want, There is no one who doesn't want freedom and democracy. I don't think the blame is democracy itself, it's a value. But what systems are we putting in place that are democratic? And do we care about each other as a global village or not? I care about what's happening in Afghanistan. I care about what's happening in Palestine. I act on that. I stand in solidarity. I donate. I support. I mobilize. And I think the whole world should do that, not when something happens here that we suddenly wake up and we're like, we need solidarity. We always need solidarity, because we always need to prevent conflict, and we will continue to resolve things with climate change and with a lot of upcoming disasters. So let's really broaden our perspective that we are a human family, and we need to care about long-standing conflicts happening in DRC and in South Sudan, and people at the edge of starvation in Somalia. 6 million people at the edge of starvation, also because of the sanctions that are happening in Russia. In my country, there were bread riots in 1978 because of a lack of bread. So let's also ground ourselves in the concept that our struggles are interconnected, our liberation is interconnected. I cannot live in my country, within my borders, in my bubble, and say my safety and security. It's all of us together. We win all or we lose all.
Aya, thank you so much for reminding us that. Natalia, another 10 seconds on what to do about Russia.
Well, this is not only the war of Russia against Ukraine. This is obviously, we understand this is a war of the dictatorship against the democratic world. And all of us who believe in this democratic world should unite and help Ukraine. And Ukraine knows best how to be helped. So we should all listen to it. For us, pro-democracy Russians, this is a top priority, but our biggest battle will be for the values of the Russian society, for the soul of the Russian society. It will be very excruciating work, but please do believe in us, do believe in free Belarus and in free Russia. We need your help, we need your solidarity. There is a dictatorship international. We should be even stronger than that. We should have this democracy international.
Thank you. Just before we thank the audience, two quick things to say. One is that this is a huge discussion. Look these guys up on Google. They've all written brilliant things, and you can continue to hear what they have to say about these subjects on a very wide-ranging fronts and a whole series of different ways of looking at this problem. Second thing is, before we give them all a round of applause, is that Ali Aslan will come in, so stay in your seats after we've thanked them to wrap up the day. But thank you all for a wonderful discussion. I feel very guilty we couldn't make it 2 hours. Such is life. This is a conference. We have to be somewhat disciplined about our time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Indeed, yes, very emotional debate that I followed backstage. A topic, Ukraine, obviously, that also dominated the second day. This is, of course, 100 days since we marked the beginning of the war, so it's very fitting to have representatives from the Ukrainian government here, but also longtime supporters, of course, that are spreading the message. It was a very diverse day in many ways, both in terms of topics, but also regions. If we look at it, we started the day actually with the Director General of the WHO, Tedros Ghebreyesus, of course, who asked us and warned us to stay vigilant about this other problem that is a bit now in the back burner, the pandemic and all the other things, the health hazards that come with it. We had a very interesting session here. We had the Indian Foreign Minister here this morning, who obviously shared his message and his view and his perspective, was asked many times about his position vis-a-vis Russia, of course, but he also warned us, particularly those living in this part of the world, to stop seeing the world exclusively through the Western lenses. And I think for a country that has 1.5 billion people, that's a valid point to make. Of course, a very big Balkan panel. We had here in total 6 prime ministers, many foreign ministers, of course, and so forth. So this wraps up day 2, another big success for Globsec with many dignitaries and fruitful discussions. Interestingly enough, another success is the San Javelin fundraising campaign, actually, for Ukraine. I've been just told backstage is a big success. Most, if not all of the items already sold out. So that is good news indeed. Let me just leave you with a couple of side notes as to what we are going to do next from here. There's obviously going to be a cocktail and concert in support of Ukraine. So buses for that leave at 7:40 p.m. From here, from the hotel. So the cocktail and concert for support of Ukraine will take place at the Bratislava Castle then at 8:30 p.m. So that's certainly a highlight that all of you can look forward to. Tomorrow we will be back here for day 3, starting bright and early at 9 a.m. That's all from me. Wishing you a pleasant evening. Thank you for your attention. Day 2 is in the can. 3 days to come. Wishing you a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.